Captain Jake Morrison earned his nickname Tank not because he was built like one, though his 6-foot frame and perpetually skeptical expression certainly helped. No, Tank got his name because he had a remarkable talent for bulldozing through whatever cosmic nonsense the universe threw at him, which made him either the perfect choice for humanity's first major diplomatic mission or the worst possible disaster waiting to happen. Admiral Betty Kowalski clearly leaned toward the latter opinion as she paced behind her desk, occasionally glancing at the holographic invitation floating between them like it might explode. "Let me get this straight," Tank said, studying the ornate alien script that hurt to look at directly. "The Galactic Council wants to invite Earth to their big fancy peace summit, after 3 years of treating us like we're radioactive space pirates." "The exact wording," Betty said, squinting at her tablet, "is that they wish to extend membership privileges to our, quote, developing civilization, unquote, so that we might participate in the galaxy's ongoing harmony initiatives." Tank snorted. "Harmony initiatives. Right. That what they call it when they embargo half the trade routes and pretend we don't exist?" "Look, Tank, I know this smells like a setup. Hell, it probably is a setup. But it's also our first real chance to get a seat at the big kids' table." Betty stopped pacing and fixed him with her trademark glare. "Which means I need you to not start any intergalactic incidents. Can you handle that?" "When have I ever started an incident?" "Do you want the chronological list or the alphabetical one?" Tank grinned. "Fair point. But hey, they invited us to talk peace. How much trouble could I possibly cause at a peace summit?" The look Betty gave him could have melted hull plating. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." The Harmony Station made humanity's largest space installations look like kids' toys. The thing was bigger than some moons, all gleaming surfaces and impossible geometry that made Tank's eyes water if he stared too long. Apparently, when you've had faster-than-light travel for a few thousand years, you get really good at showing off. Tank's shuttle docked with what he assumed was the least important bay, judging by the complete lack of fanfare. No welcoming committee, no ceremonial anything, but just a bored-looking maintenance droid that scanned his credentials and pointed him toward what it called the Primitive Species Orientation Center. Charming. The Orientation Center turned out to be a waiting room that would have been insulting if it weren't so pathetically obvious. The chairs were sized wrong, the gravity felt off, and everything was labeled in what Tank could only assume was the galactic equivalent of crayon drawings. "Captain Morrison, I presume?" The voice sounded like someone gargling marbles. Tank turned to see something that looked like a 6-foot slug wearing a tuxedo. "I am Chancellor Flibbert of the Administrative Council. We are so pleased that your species has progressed to the point where meaningful dialogue is possible." "Yeah, thanks for that ringing endorsement," Tank replied. "I take it you're running this show?" "Oh goodness no," Flibbert's eye stalks waved dismissively. "I merely handle preliminary assessments. The actual summit will be conducted by beings far more qualified to interface with developing civilizations." Before Tank could ask what exactly made him so unqualified, a new voice cut through the air like a buzzsaw. "Administrative Council protocols remain suboptimal for direct primitive contact scenarios." Tank looked up to see something that resembled a praying mantis crossed with a luxury sports car. It moved with mechanical precision, each gesture calculated to the microsecond. "Ambassador Zach," Flibbert explained hastily, "representative of the Precision Collective. They handle technical aspects of integration. Integration parameters for human specimens remain undefined," Zizak clicked. "The behavioral patterns suggest significant deviations from civilized norms." "Well, you're not wrong there," Tank said cheerfully. "We're pretty deviant." A new presence entered the room, though entered wasn't quite right since it seemed to simply materialize out of thin air. It looked like someone had taken starlight and convinced it to wear a robe. "Ah, the human arrives," it said in a voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I am High Counselor Vex of the Ascended Collective. We look forward to observing your species' attempts at transcending its base nature." Tank looked around at the three aliens, then back at the patronizing signage, then at the orientation materials that were basically picture books, and felt something click into place. You know what? I think I'm starting to understand the situation here. Excellent, Flibbert burbled. The orientation process is designed to ease the transition into civilized discourse. Oh, I'm not talking about your little dog and pony show, Tank said, his grin getting sharper. I'm talking about the fact that you people have absolutely no idea what you're doing, do you? The actual summit chamber was exactly what Tank expected from beings who valued appearance over substance. Massive curved walls covered in flowing alien script, floating platforms arranged in some mystical pattern that probably had deep cultural significance, and enough dramatic lighting to power a small city. The delegates were arranged by what Tank assumed was some kind of galactic pecking order. The energy beings got the highest platforms naturally, while the various corporeal species were arranged below them in descending order of apparent self-importance. Humanity's platform was so low it was practically on the floor. High Counselor Vex's voice resonated through the chamber with a kind of pompous authority that made Tank's teeth itch. We gather today in the spirit of cosmic harmony to address the growing concerns regarding territorial disputes, resource allocation, and the integration of less developed species into our galactic community. Before we begin, Chancellor Flibbert added, I must remind all participants that proper protocols must be observed. We have millennia of diplomatic tradition to uphold. Tank raised his hand. Quick question about these protocols. The chamber fell silent. Apparently, interrupting the opening ceremonies wasn't part of those millennia of tradition. Yes, Vex said, with the patience of someone addressing a particularly slow child. How exactly are we supposed to address growing concerns if we spend all our time talking about how we're going to talk about them? Ambassador Zizak's mechanical clicking intensified. Procedural frameworks ensure optimal communication efficiency. Do they, though? Tank leaned forward. Because I've been listening to you people for 2 hours now, and the only thing I've learned is that you really like the sound of your own voices. A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the assembled delegates. Tank was pretty sure some of them were clutching their pearls, metaphorically speaking. Captain Morrison, Flibbert said carefully, perhaps you misunderstand the nature of diplomatic discourse. Oh, I understand it perfectly. You're all sitting here playing word games while actual problems pile up outside. Speaking of which, what's this I hear about something called the Void Swarm? The reaction was immediate and telling. Every alien in the chamber suddenly found something fascinating to look at that wasn't Tank. Energy beings dimmed, insectoids clicked nervously, and even the slug creatures seemed to be trying to shrink into their shells. The Void Swarm situation is under careful consideration, Vex said finally, his voice notably less wind-chimey than before. Careful consideration, Tank repeated. Right. How long have you been carefully considering it? The Administrative Council has been monitoring the situation for approximately 47 standard cycles, Flibbert admitted. 47 years. And what have you done about it in 47 years? We have formed several committees, Zak offered helpfully. Tank stared at the mechanical being. Committees, but highly efficient committees with optimal resource allocation parameters, to study a swarm of spacefaring monsters that's been eating solar systems. The situation requires nuanced analysis, Vex interjected. Tank stood up, which caused another wave of nervous chattering. You know what? I think I'm starting to see why you invited humanity to this little tea party. You're not looking for new members. You're looking for someone else to blame when you're careful, Consci. That accusation is completely unfounded, Chancellor Flibbert protested, his eye stalks waving indignantly. The Galactic Council has always operated with the highest ethical standards. Sure you have, Tank said, pulling out a small device that made half the delegates flinch. Don't panic, it's just a data pad. Though I'm curious why everyone's so jumpy about human technology. Human devices lack proper safety certifications, Zach clicked rapidly. Uncontrolled technological variables present significant risk factors. Funny thing about that, Tank continued, ignoring the mounting tension in the chamber. See, while you folks have been forming committees and having nuanced discussions, we've been dealing with our own void swarm problem. High Counselor Vex's energy form flickered. Impossible. The swarm has not reached your sector. You're right, it hasn't. Because we stopped it. Tank let that sink in for a moment. 3 months ago, a splinter group broke off from your main swarm and headed toward Earth. We had about 2 weeks to figure out what to do about it. 2 weeks is insufficient time for proper analysis, Flibbert burbled anxiously. That's what we thought too. Lucky for us, we don't have the luxury of 47 years to think about problems. So instead of forming committees, we did something crazy. Tank's grin was getting positively predatory. We actually solved it. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, all expressing various degrees of disbelief and horror. How? Vex demanded, his wind chime voice now more like breaking glass. Oh, it was beautifully simple. See, your void swarm creatures are basically organic machines, right? They consume matter and energy to reproduce. Classic exponential growth problem. You've been trying to fight them like they're an army, but they're not. They're more like a virus. Tank started pacing, which made the aliens even more nervous. So we asked ourselves, what do you do with a virus? You don't negotiate with it. You don't form committees to study it. You create a vaccine. Biological warfare against a spacefaring species violates 17 different galactic treaties, Flibbert said weakly. Good thing we didn't use biological warfare then. We used something much worse. Tank paused for dramatic effect. We used engineering. Ambassador Zach's clicking reached a frantic pitch. Engineering specifications for void swarm countermeasures do not exist in any database. That's because you've been thinking about this wrong for 47 years. You keep trying to destroy the swarm, but that's like trying to cure cancer by punching it. Instead, we just made them irrelevant. Explain, Vex commanded, though he sounded like he really didn't want to hear the answer. We created a synthetic food source that's more attractive to them than regular matter, but completely indigestible. They eat it, they can't process it, they can't reproduce, and they starve. We call it void bait. Tank shrugged. Took us 6 days to develop and 3 days to deploy. The splinter group is now floating harmlessly in our outer system, too busy trying to digest synthetic matter to bother anyone. The silence that followed was so complete Tank could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Chancellor Flibbert spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. You eliminated a void swarm splinter group in 9 days. Well, 8 days really. Day 9 was just cleanup and paperwork. The chamber stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Tank could practically see the gears turning in various alien minds as they processed the implications of what he'd just told them. High Counselor Vex was the first to recover. Even if your claims are accurate, a single splinter group hardly represents the full threat posed by the primary swarm. You're absolutely right, Tank agreed cheerfully. Which is why we've been working on scaling up production of void bait. Current estimates suggest we could neutralize the entire swarm within 6 months. 6 months, Ambassador Zazak repeated, her mechanical voice glitching slightly. Optimization parameters indicate impossibility of such temporal efficiency. Yeah, that's what we thought too. But then we remembered that impossible is just another word for no one's tried the right approach yet. Chancellor Flibbert's eye stalks were trembling. The economic implications alone would be catastrophic. The military-industrial complex of 17 different species depends on swarm containment contracts. Tank stopped pacing and looked directly at the slug-like being. Did you just admit that you've been letting people die to protect defense contracts? I didn't say that. You kind of did, though. Tank pulled out another device, this one with a blinking red light. Good thing I've been recording this whole conversation. The reaction was immediate and panicked. Delegates started talking over each other in at least 6 different languages. Energy beings flickered like broken light bulbs, and somewhere in the chaos, Tank was pretty sure he heard someone mention calling security. "You cannot record these proceedings," Vex declared, his voice now decidedly unwine-chimey. "Diplomatic immunity protocols strictly forbid unauthorized documentation." "Funny thing about that," Tank said, holding up the device. "Humanity never actually agreed to your diplomatic immunity protocols. Hard to agree to something when no one bothered to tell us about it." "This is extortion," Flibbert burbled. "No, this is transparency." "Big difference." Tank pocketed the recorder. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to authorize the immediate deployment of void bait throughout swarm-affected sectors. You're going to publicly credit humanity with solving a problem you couldn't handle for half a century. And you're going to start treating Earth like an equal partner. Instead of some backwater colony, you're doing a favor. And if we refuse?" Zezek clicked menacingly. Tank's grin got even wider. "Then I broadcast this entire conversation to every news network, data stream and communication channel in the galaxy. I think your citizens might be very interested to learn how their leaders have been handling the void swarm crisis." "You wouldn't dare," Vex said, but his energy form was noticeably dimmer. "Chancellor, with all due respect, I'm human. We invented daring stupid things and making them work anyway. It's basically our species-defining characteristic." The aliens huddled together in what Tank assumed was supposed to be a private conference, but human hearing was apparently better than they'd calculated. He caught enough fragments to understand that they were weighing the political cost of cooperation against the political cost of exposure. Finally, High Counselor Vex turned back to him. "Your terms are acceptable. However, we require assurances that this recording will remain confidential." "Oh, absolutely," Tank said. "As long as humanity gets full credit for solving the swarm problem and equal representation in all future galactic decisions. Plus unrestricted access to galactic trade networks and technology exchanges." "That's blackmail," Flibbert protested weakly. "No, that's negotiation. You should try it sometime instead of just talking about things." 3 weeks later, Tank was back on Earth, sitting in Admiral Kowalski's office and watching her read through his mission report for the 3rd time. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said finally. "You went to a peace summit, accused the galactic government of criminal negligence, solved their biggest crisis in under 10 minutes, blackmailed them into treating us as equals, and somehow came home without starting a war. Technically, I think I prevented several wars. The void swarm thing was getting pretty serious." Betty leaned back in her chair and studied him with the expression she usually reserved for particularly complex tactical problems. "Tank, do you have any idea what you've done? Made some new friends? You've completely upended the galactic power structure. Half the member species are demanding investigations into the Council's handling of the swarm crisis. The other half are forming alliances with us because they figure if we can solve impossible problems, we might be worth knowing." Tank shrugged. "Sounds like progress to me. 3 different alien governments have requested human advisors for their own crisis management teams. The Precision Collective wants to license our void bait technology. And Chancellor Flibbert's species apparently voted him out of office yesterday. Good for them. Maybe they'll get someone who actually wants to solve problems instead of just talking about them." Betty was quiet for a moment, then started laughing. "You know what the best part is? The galactic news networks are calling it the human miracle. They're acting like we're some kind of problem-solving wizards." "We kind of are though," Tank pointed out. "We just don't make a big deal about it. No, we just show up, fix impossible things, and leave everyone else wondering what the hell just happened." Betty shook her head, still grinning. "You realize this means we're going to get invited to every crisis summit, peace negotiation and diplomatic emergency from now on. Could be worse. At least now they'll actually listen when we talk. Betty's expression grew more serious. Tank, I have to ask. The whole void bait solution, the recording, the negotiations. How much of that was planned? Tank was quiet for a moment, then smiled. You know what they say about humans, Admiral. We're really good at improvising. But we're even better at making it look like we knew what we were doing all along. Outside the office windows, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, blissfully unaware that it had just become the galaxy's go-to problem solvers. In the depths of space, void swarm creatures were discovering that their new favorite food source was remarkably unsatisfying. And throughout the galaxy, various alien species were having uncomfortable conversations about the difference between looking competent and actually being competent. Humanity had arrived at the Peace Summit with open hands. They'd left with the entire galaxy in their pocket, and somehow made it look easy. Just another day at the office for the species that specialized in making the impossible look routine.